The legends of the Hito are known to all, fictional creatures that exist only in the realm of imagination and ancient lore. Among the populace, there are those fascinated by these myths, often labeled Hito lovers. These beings are depicted in folklore as physically frail yet remarkably clever, possessing the strange ability to grow hair primarily upon their heads. This peaceful afternoon is suddenly disrupted as a dark streak of smoke carves a path through the sky above the harbor. They stop and stare, their animal instincts flaring as they try to comprehend the anomaly falling toward them. It is a metallic vessel, its descent slowed by a wide parachute. This singular event is the reason these once-dismissed myths have suddenly captured the world's undivided attention. The onlookers can only watch in stunned silence as the object nears the water, the line between ancient legend and terrifying reality beginning to dissolve. It slams into the center of the lake with a violent splash, the metallic cage hissing as steam rises from the impact site. He steps out from the open hatch, a solitary figure standing on a planet that is not his own, the first Hito to walk among them. He is now under the custody of the Chemo federal government at Gargan Fortress. A cat-eared woman named Tonaliko introduces herself as the press secretary, tasked with managing the public fallout of his arrival. She adjusts her spectacles, explaining that a special council has been formed to decide the legal status of this unprecedented being. While she watches, he is led through the facility by armed guards. The official observes him closely, noting his designation as Hito 01 and his unsettlingly smooth, hairless skin. Watching him, she finds it impossible to understand why some of her kind are so obsessed with these creatures, finding his appearance almost offensive. This creature's anatomy is then subjected to rigorous comparison against their own. While animal folk tend to hunch as they grow larger, he stands perfectly vertical. He towers over the press secretary. Yet remarkably, he weighs no more than a standard Chemo citizen. His posture is unervingly straight. This unique stance has fascinated the lead researcher, Dr. Drill, who calls it true bipedalism. The human demonstrates his strength and lack of social boundaries by lifting Tonaliko high into the air, ignoring her indignant demands to be put down. Beyond his posture, the doctor is captivated by the complex structure of his hands. The press secretary, meanwhile, continues her documentation, careful not to imply that this Hito is in any way superior to the Chemo people. She watched as the scientists analyzed the specimen's limb, noting its remarkable range of motion from shoulder to fingertips. The report highlighted the creature's high-precision digits, suggesting a level of manual dexterity that might even rival their own. To test this theory, they provided the human with a writing implement, and he immediately recognized its purpose. With surprising intellect, he began to mimic the act of writing, his long fingers gripping the tool with practiced ease. The resulting marks on the paper appeared to be a complex series of symbols accompanied by a crude drawing of a celestial body, though the observers dismissed it as mere meaningless imitation. They couldn't fathom that these scribbles were a coherent introduction from a world called Earth. While the doctor became obsessed with these unique glyphs, intending to analyze them as a potential language, others remained skeptical. He seemed to be overestimating the creature, projecting intelligence onto what was surely just random scratching. She, however, found the display increasingly irritating, especially as the human began idly spinning the pen between his fingers with casual nonchalance. To her, this bizarre evolutionary quirk was nothing more than a distraction from the task at hand. Losing her patience, she lunged forward and snatched the tool away, her movements a blur of professional frustration. The sudden outburst shattered the quiet atmosphere of the observation room. This abrupt action left the doctor and the specimen stunned, the human recoiling slightly from her sudden proximity. She ignored their startled expressions, her mind already moving past the anatomical study of the hands. Returning to her notes, she officially dismissed the significance of the creature's manual dexterity as unworthy of further attention. With a flick of her own pen, she declared the trial over and prepared to move the investigation toward the subject's integumentary system. She observes the starkest difference between their species. Beyond the head, his skin is entirely devoid of hair. Looking closer, her sense of aversion only deepens as she confronts this biological anomaly. She reaches out to touch him, a task she would never have considered if it weren't a requirement of her work. The texture reminds her of the pads on their own paws, making the idea of a creature composed entirely of such skin feel profoundly abnormal. Pressing further, she notes that his body temperature is slightly lower than theirs, yet his skin feels unusually warm to the touch due to high heat dissipation. Despite her initial disgust, she admits the scent is not particularly offensive. The weight of exhaustion from days of relentless research finally begins to take its toll, and she finds herself leaning into him, her eyes fluttering shut as a colleague calls out her name in concern. Meanwhile, Dr. Drill shifts the discussion toward a new hypothesis regarding why the Hito evolved in such a specific manner, suggesting the physical traits are a result of a biological need to reduce body temperature. He explains that as creatures evolved into bipedal forms and moved further from the ground, they gained the ability to better regulate their internal heat, which eventually led to the reduction of body hair. This biological efficiency allowed for the development of a highly functional brain, one that required constant cooling to prevent overheating and allow for the complex thought now evident in his focused writing. He remains the silent subject of her thoughts as she adjusts her glasses, the logic of the doctor's theory beginning to take hold before a sudden realization stops her cold. Dr. Drill leans in, his expression grave as he cautions her about the upcoming press conference. He warns that with preliminary results looming, they must avoid any statements that could spark unnecessary controversy. She, however, is visibly shaken by the implication, demanding to know if the logical conclusion isn't that this human has actually evolved much further than the chemo themselves. As the weight of that radical idea hangs in the air, she's interrupted by the approach of several large officials, their heavy footsteps echoing in the hallway as one of them calls out her name with a hesitant tone. The lead official, a burly bear-like man, wipes sweat from his brow as he nervously brings up a persistent rumor from old stories. The strange notion that the touch of a human is so intensely pleasurable it can cause a person to lose consciousness. She stares at them in utter disbelief, her eyes narrowing behind her spectacles as she demands to know why they're sharing such absurd information. She sharply questions if they have all become Hito lovers, a term for those with a deviant obsession with the creature. Rebuffed and humiliated, the group of officials trudges away, their shoulders slumped as they lament the possibility of becoming the nation's laughingstock if word gets out that the inspection commission is filled with such eccentrics. Left alone once more, she scoffs at the very idea, her posture radiating a cold, intellectual superiority as she concludes that there is no need to even investigate such a ridiculous claim. To her, it is perfectly obvious that the touch of such a bizarre being could never be anything but unpleasant. That certainty vanishes instantly as the human's hands begin to massage her head, sending a jolt of pure, overwhelming sensation through her body that forces a series of involuntary, high-pitched feline cries from her throat. She remains visibly shaken, her body trembling as she struggles to regain her professional composure after the human's touch. Behind her, the primate sits with a look of mild bewilderment, while the stern officials observe the scene with a mixture of curiosity and silent judgment. Several days pass, and a formal diagram of the creature is prepared for a public briefing. The illustration depicts the human in his flight suit, a decision made to shield the public from the potentially distressing sight of his bare skin. Curiously, his five-fingered hands have been censored in the report, as the authorities deemed their appearance too unsettlingly similar to reproductive organs. As the day of the interim report arrives, a massive auditorium fills with a sea of animal folk, all eager to hear the findings. From the stage, the scale of the public's interest is undeniable, with every seat occupied by citizens and officials alike. Standing before the gathered crowd, the press secretary regains her professional mask, detailing the biological assessment of the human. She explains that while his physical functions possess unique aspects, his muscular strength and most of his senses are significantly inferior to those of any chemo, with the sole exception of his eyesight. Seated among the high-ranking officials, the elderly doctor listens as the final verdict is delivered. The collective assessment of the scientific and military minds is clear. The human is to be classified as an inferior being, a primitive creature of little threat. The news spreads quickly through the city, met with a mixture of mockery and boredom by the populace, who dismiss the human as a weakling. Amidst this reception, a towering lion in a sharp suit, Director Leon, approaches the press secretary, booming with laughter as he congratulates her on a magnificent report. He continues his praise, though his words carry a sharp edge of condescension toward the subject of the study. The director remarks on the immense stress she must feel having to observe such a pathetic, unevolved monster day after day, reminding her that strict discipline is required to ensure everyone remembers who stands at the top of the food chain. As the director's voice drones on, she remains silent, her expression unreadable behind her glasses. He scoffs at the idea of the human possessing any self-awareness, claiming that if the creature had even a shred of intelligence, it would be too ashamed to even exist in such a pitiable form. She stands quietly as the director acknowledges the human's surprising intellect, admitting that their daily interactions are becoming increasingly significant. She reassures him that the research is moving swiftly and there is no cause for concern regarding their progress. As she departs, she is intercepted by the elderly doctor, who expresses surprise at her presence. He suggests she shouldn't take the recent insults to heart, particularly given her own insistence on classifying the specimen as a primitive being. Despite the friction among the leadership, the mandate remains clear. They must continue to gather objective data, a process that will eventually force even the most skeptical officials to temper their disdain. 6 days into this rigorous observation period, the team reaches a sudden and unexpected turning point in their study, a complete breakthrough. This breakthrough takes the form of a written message from the human, who has successfully used their script to introduce himself as Kanashima Hitoshi, a planetary traveler, and offer his thanks. She gazes at the parchment in stunned silence, having never anticipated that their attempts at communication would prove so effective, especially now that the human can even write his own name. The revelation drives the doctor into a scholarly fever, as he becomes so engrossed in exchanging information with the human that he begins to overlook his formal scientific responsibilities in favor of teaching him history and grammar. He watches in awe as the human specimen consumes knowledge at an impossible rate, reading for hours on end without the aid of corrective lenses, a feat that makes their own intellectual capabilities seem meager by comparison. 3 days into this unprecedented exchange, the greatest enigma surrounding the creature, his origin, begins to unravel as he provides the first concrete details about where he came from. Despite the sheer impossibility of living beings surviving such a journey, he maintains that he arrived from a distant world, crossing the vastness of space within the metallic shell of his vessel. As she walks through the sterile corridors of the facility, the weight of this revelation settles on her. If his claims are true, the technological and scientific progress of his civilization surpasses their own by an unimaginable margin. Her reflections are interrupted by the imposing presence of the director, who demands to know why the flow of reports has suddenly ceased, prompting her to quickly fabricate excuses about mounting administrative hurdles and the need for more time. He lets out a booming laugh, acknowledging her thoroughness, but making it clear that his patience has limits, expressing a growing eagerness to witness the capabilities of this monster for himself. 6 days into the intensive study, the toll of obsession becomes clear as the elderly doctor lies collapsed on the floor, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion after he spent every waking moment immersed in the human's translated space diaries. She is forced to step in and assume full control of the administrative duties, relieved that the doctor's condition isn't life-threatening, but frustrated that he neglected his own well-being in his pursuit of knowledge. The human sat at the table, his pen moving with a precision that defied his alien physiology. Though his vocal cords could not replicate their speech, he had mastered their written word to a level of near perfection. Across from him, the press secretary watched in silence, noting how he had bridged the gap between their species through ink and paper. While the doctor remained confined to his bed for recovery, the flow of information continued through a series of detailed letters. He sat propped against his pillows, startled by the updates regarding the visitor's rapid adaptation and the complexities of their ongoing communication. Back at the table, she gripped her own pen, her expression clouded with a growing sense of unease. There was a confession weighing heavily on her mind, a realization about the creature sitting just inches away that she could no longer ignore. He continued to write, the rhythmic scratching of his pen filling the quiet room with an intensity that felt almost aggressive. Watching the steady, unwavering movement of his hand, she felt a cold shiver of genuine fear begin to take root. Whether she wanted to admit it or not, the truth was becoming undeniable. This being was not some primitive specimen to be studied. She looked at him, realizing with a sinking heart that his intellect likely far surpassed their own, making him a solitary, misunderstood force in their world. As she eventually stood to leave, the weight of the situation felt heavier than ever. She wondered how he would view their society and their treatment of him if he truly understood the nuances of their culture. Surely, he would harbor nothing but resentment for his captors. The human leaned back, resting his head against his hand in a moment of apparent exhaustion, yet his mere presence remained overwhelming. She found herself unable to even meet his gaze, terrified by the thought of what might happen if he ever managed to summon others of his kind to this planet. Standing alone in the sterile hallway, she was met with a sudden, jarring announcement that changed everything. The first inspection cycle for the visitor had been abruptly canceled, an emergency measure enacted for the supposed safety of the public, leaving her frozen in a state of pure shock. She stands behind the director as he gazes out the window, his voice cold as he declares that 01 must be put to sleep. He turns slightly, questioning if his orders were misunderstood. In response to her confusion, he posits that the human likely brought lethal pathogens to their world, which would explain why Dr. Drill collapsed. She can only manage a whispered question, desperate to understand the sudden shift in policy. She quickly finds her voice, countering that the pathogen theory is merely a formal excuse concocted by the leadership. She argues that if the human were truly a biological threat, the rest of the team would have fallen ill by now. The director's composure snaps, his face contorting into a snarl as he insists the monster cannot remain. He warns that this creature's intellect is far beyond anything the chemo have ever encountered. He looms over her, explaining that this is a matter of racial survival, where those in power must inevitably crush those beneath them to ensure their own future. She stammers in disbelief, reminding him that they have only managed to survive for a few days under these new conditions. He lets out a thunderous roar, asserting that while they are a society built on law and order, they cannot afford the luxury of a public trial. He justifies his plan by claiming that if the deed is done before the public catches wind, it won't be seen as an execution of a fellow being, but rather the disposal of mere refuse. Meanwhile, the subject of their conspiracy sits quietly in his quarters, focused on his writing. The director's voice echoes the grim plan. They will buy enough time to make the humans end appear to be the result of simple exhaustion, a necessary step to eliminate the threat. He continues his work in silence, unaware that the very people he is trying to communicate with have already marked him for death. He had been the target of a lethal conspiracy, but 4 days have passed since those dark plans were set in motion. The focus shifts to the quiet outskirts of the city, where the dome-shaped houses of Tonaliko's family home sit nestled among the trees. Inside, she lies sprawled across a large cushion, her formal suit wrinkled and her spirit clearly broken. Her family members stand over her, frustrated by her sudden return and her lack of care for her appearance, chiding her for simply collapsing the moment she walked through the door. She remains motionless, her face buried in the fabric as she tells them to just leave her alone. When they press her, she bitterly asks who could possibly care about her state anyway. Her younger sister can't help but tease her, playfully asking if the rumors are true and if she has really become a Hito lover. This earns a muffled, half-hearted threat from the cushion, though the girl just laughs it off. The teasing stops when the sister mentions a letter that arrived from the office, noting it was sent by someone named Hitoshi. Hearing that name, she bolts upright, her previous lethargy vanishing in an instant. She snatches the letter and begins to read, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and dread. The words on the page carry the voice of the man who wrote them late at night under the glow of a desk lamp. He explains that he felt his time being observed was drawing to a close, and that he felt compelled to write to her and the doctor before the end came. His thoughts drift to the vast, silent expanse of the cosmos, reflecting on his original mission to explore the furthest reaches of space where no human had ever set foot. He had been driven by a theory, a mathematical certainty that a mirror world existed somewhere in the vast, glittering expanse of the cosmos. It was a planet that could be considered a perfect reflection of his own, hidden away in the dark. To reach it, he embarked on a voyage into the unknown, surrendering himself to a deep, artificial slumber to survive the grueling years required for such a journey. He had departed his home with the heavy realization that even if he were to return, the world he knew would be long gone. The silence of the void was his only companion, and he accepted that the most probable end to his story was a solitary disappearance into the infinite emptiness. Having left his world behind, he became a mere speck of light drifting through the absolute dark. Tears streamed down his face as he looked back, not at what he lost, but at the memory of the people who had once waited for him. He vowed never to forget the overwhelming joy he felt upon first seeing the lights of their cities. These strangers had taught him a profound truth, that despite the terrifying distances between stars, they had neighbors. They were not, as he had once feared, alone in the universe. As the elderly doctor read these words, the weight of the pilot's affection became clear. He confessed that regardless of their opinions of him, he loved them all deeply, proudly declaring himself a friend to their kind. He finished his message with a final, heartfelt sentiment, stating that no matter what the future held, meeting them was his greatest pride. With a simple thank you for everything, Kanashima Hitoshi signed his name, closing the final chapter of his correspondence. Tonaliko sits alone on the floor of her room, the weight of the letter's final words settling over her like a heavy shroud. The space is silent, save for the soft rustle of the paper in her hands as she processes the human's profound farewell. Suddenly, she springs into action, clutching her belongings and bolting for the door with a newfound sense of urgency. Her family calls out in shock at her sudden departure, but she is already gone, disappearing into the bright morning light with her mind firmly made up. The transition from the quiet of her home to the grand stage of public life is jarring. The vast, vaulted ceiling of the government assembly hall looms overhead, a silent witness to the history about to be made as the final press conference begins. Below that ceiling, a sea of faces fills the auditorium to capacity. Officials and citizens alike wait in hushed anticipation, their collective gaze fixed on the empty podium as they recall the unprecedented events of their contact with the human. Stepping into the light, she takes a sharp, steadying breath. She is no longer acting merely as a press secretary. She is a friend with a desperate truth to tell, her resolve hardening despite the tremor in her voice as she prepares to defy her superiors. She stands before the world, a lone figure against the backdrop of a global broadcast. This is the final press conference of the first inspection cycle, and she has chosen this moment to speak not as a government official, but as an ordinary citizen pleading for the life of a friend in hopes of saving him from a cruel fate. While she speaks, the human remains confined in a stark, cold cell, isolated and deprived of food by the director's direct command. In the wings of the stage, the officials erupt in fury, their faces contorted with rage as they realize she is exposing their secrets and questioning their authority. Ignoring the chaos behind her, she continues her impassioned plea, describing the profound loneliness of the man in that room. She reminds the world that he crossed the stars on a one-way journey, knowing he might never see another of his kind again, all in the desperate hope of finding a new world. She continues her impassioned plea, recounting how from the day of his arrival, the human had always tried to adapt and meet their expectations. Instead of protesting the unfair treatment he received, he chose to learn their language in a sincere effort to communicate. Standing before the world, she emphasizes that by the end of his long journey, he had come to see them as neighbors. The crowd listens intently as her voice carries across the plaza through the loudspeakers. Meanwhile, in the observation room, Dr. Drill and the staff watch in heavy silence as she points out the sheer disrespect they have shown to a guest who traveled from the depths of space. This accusation sends Director Leon into a silent, teeth-gnashing rage, his face contorting as she explains that their cruelty stems solely from the fact that his body is different from theirs, a difference they refuse to accept. Across the nation, citizens stop in their tracks to watch the broadcast, hearing her declare that any society that would allow such a being to die in isolation can never truly consider itself civilized. She clutches her chest, her voice cracking with emotion as she warns that without compassion, they are no better than common beasts. With a final, desperate cry, she argues that if they abandon him now, they will be regressing to the level of their most primitive, savage ancestors. Her words hang in the air, leaving the massive audience in a stunned, contemplative silence as the weight of her moral challenge sinks in. They erupt in a chorus of vitriol, their faces contorted with indignation. The crowd bellows that such a monster cannot be allowed to walk among them, branding those who sympathize with the creature as immoral. They turn their fury toward the podium, demanding that their representatives serve the will of the people rather than coddling a beast. This blatant hostility finally shatters her composure. She snarls back at the crowd, her teeth bared in a raw display of feline aggression that leaves the officials behind her trembling. With a voice like a whip crack, she demands to know why her affection for the human is any of their concern, effectively silencing the room with her sudden, fierce defiance. Her voice carries far beyond the walls of the chamber, echoing into the vast, open sky. She continues her tirade, questioning if the populace had even been listening to her words or if they were simply blinded by their own prejudice. Amidst the frantic pleas of her colleagues to calm down, she declares her feelings for the man with a bluntness that leaves no room for misinterpretation. High above, the clouds drift lazily, indifferent to the chaotic shouting that still rises from the city below. The air is thick with the remnants of her explosive declaration, the sound of the crowd's confusion and her own lingering anger blending into a distant hum. As the sun begins to set, the heated arguments of the day fade into a heavy, expectant silence. The transition from the public square to the cold reality of confinement is marked by a deepening shadow that stretches across the horizon. Within the sterile confines of a holding cell, the silence is finally broken by the sharp click of a heavy door being unlatched. A guard stands in the doorway, his posture stiff as he informs the prisoner that the time has come to move. He looks up, his dark hair messy and his expression unreadable as he absorbs the news. The guard speaks with a newfound, almost hesitant respect, addressing him by his full name, Kanashima Hitoshi, and requesting that he follow them out of the cell. Walking down the long, brightly lit corridor between his escorts, the young man finds a familiar face waiting for him. She leans casually against the wall, her earlier fury replaced by a weary but genuine greeting as she welcomes him back to the world outside his cage. She stands by as the elderly doctor addresses the human. Dr. Drill offers a sincere apology for the long delay, noting the man's remarkable resilience in being able to stand and walk so soon. He assures the survivor that he will be granted ample time to fully recover from his ordeal. Outside the grand, pillared halls of the government complex, the discussion regarding his future continues. It is decided that before he can be presented to the world, he must be outfitted in attire befitting his new, elevated status. Moments later, he makes his way down a vast, sterile corridor toward a waiting assembly of high-ranking officials. The weight of the moment hangs heavy in the air as the lone human approaches the line of stern-faced leaders. One of the officials, a stout bulldog in a formal suit, steps forward to address him by his full name, Kanashima Hitoshi. Beside the dignitaries, the feline press secretary watches with a mixture of relief and professional stoicism. Now clad once more in the familiar bulk of his pressurized flight suit, he stands tall as the official proclamation is read. He is formally recognized as a temporary diplomat representing the planet Earth, a title that grants him the right to remain within their borders indefinitely. High above, the clouds drift across a peaceful sky as the speaker offers a solemn wish for a bond between their peoples that will endure for all eternity. As they move out into the open air of the palace grounds, the decree is finalized. He is no longer a prisoner or a specimen, but a being granted equal rights under the law, recognized simply as a visitor from another world. Having shed the heavy suit for simpler clothes, he is met with a sudden, deep bow of respect from his former captor. She vows that from this day forward, no one will dare treat him with the disrespect he has endured, as the official records now classify his kind as a fellow mammal. She declares that from this moment forward, she and Hitoshi will be working as partners. The official record notes the physical peculiarities of his kind, their heads positioned directly over their center of gravity and their lack of protective fur. Yet they are now recognized as equals. As they walk side by side, the chronicler notes that his species is remarkably intelligent, capable of using their forelimbs with enough precision to communicate through the written word. She pauses when her name is called, her ears twitching as she looks back. While the anatomical differences in their vocal cords make it difficult for his kind to perfectly replicate the sounds of her people, the effort is unmistakable. He offers a small, sincere smile and attempts a word of gratitude in her native tongue. Despite the phonetic struggle, the intent is clear, proving that communication is possible across the vast evolutionary divide. Seeing his effort, she is overcome with emotion, pressing her hands to her face to hide her tears. The words of Dr. Drill echo in the air, reminding everyone that these visitors are evolutionary comrades from a world far, far away. He lifts the small press secretary high into the air, a playful gesture that highlights the physical difference between their species. This is the story of what happened after human arrived on the planet of beast folk, a world where everyone had heard the legends of the mythical creatures known as Hito. In a local pool, a figure cuts through the water with an intensity and speed that defies the expectations of the onlookers. The swimmer's movements are precise, powered by a skeletal structure designed for a different kind of locomotion than the planet's native inhabitants. A smooth, hairless hand reaches out to grip the tiled edge, a stark contrast to the furred limbs common in this world. He rises from the water, goggles pushed up, revealing the face of the creature once thought to be nothing more than a fairy tale, a human. Suddenly, the air is filled with the blinding strobes of cameras, capturing the reality of the myth for all to see. He has become the eye of a media hurricane, though the immediate pressure falls upon his handlers. Amidst a relentless barrage of camera flashes, Tonalico and Dr. Drill find themselves besieged by reporters. The press secretary, squinting against the light, questions the necessity of such an exhaustive photographic record for a simple post-swim exit. As he makes his exit from the pool area, the frenzy shows no signs of abating. A lone figure in the distance, he leaves behind a chaotic scene where onlookers wonder aloud why every mundane movement of the Hito must be captured by the press. The visitor's presence continues to spark intense debate among the onlookers as they review the footage of his arrival. They observe him, a being from a distant evolutionary path, glistening with water, with some reacting in awe of his alien grace while others find his smooth, wet skin unsettlingly repulsive. This individual, Kanashima Hitoshi, is a biological enigma to them. His lean, muscular frame, now synonymous with the title Hito, represents a physical marvel that has captured the entire planet's imagination. Away from the prying eyes of the pool, a train cuts through the heart of the city. The urban landscape, dotted with feline-inspired architecture, hums with the quiet energy of a society processing the day's revelations. Inside the moving carriage, the atmosphere finally shifts toward quiet reflection. An official breaks the silence to commend Hitoshi on his exceptional performance, officially declaring that the grueling battery of physical evaluations and sports tests has reached its conclusion. His performance data is meticulously compiled into a series of reports. From the depths of the pool to the mats of the judo hall and the long-distance tracks, the evidence of his dominance across every discipline is undeniable. Back at the headquarters, these findings ignite a spirited discussion between Tonalico and Dr. Drill. While the press secretary enthusiastically celebrates the records he shattered, the doctor remains characteristically clinical, pointing out that his true value lies in his unprecedented versatility across every single athletic category. He observes that while each beast folk race possesses unique physical traits, they're also bound by inherent weaknesses. No matter how much they try to develop their shortcomings, they often fail, whereas they demonstrate unparalleled abilities in their specific domains. The human contemplates this reality while standing alone by the window. The doctor's voice echoes the realization that Hitoshi's ability to pass every discipline with high marks is a direct result of his unique physiology, granting him a dexterity and flexibility that seems flawless in any action. He is soon joined by the press secretary, who leans in to examine the notes he has been taking. A playful yet analytical thought crosses her mind. If a sport were created that combined running, throwing, swimming, and even receiving head pats, this human would undoubtedly perform without peer. Her gaze shifts to the notebook, where the pages are filled with his meticulous script. He has posed a fundamental question that strikes at the heart of their world's history, wondering how a society composed of so many diverse and distinct species could have ever come to be. The doctor continues, explaining the prevailing theory of a sudden, simultaneous evolutionary leap across several different species. In a brief window of time, various animals began to develop higher intelligence and bipedal forms all at once. As these tribes grew, conflicts were inevitable, but battles between equally intelligent beings proved to be devastatingly costly. To ensure survival, the different groups gradually began to avoid one another, seeking to minimize the heavy toll of constant warfare. This period of mutual avoidance eventually paved the way for a more stable, peaceful coexistence. Through this long and difficult process, the foundations of their modern, integrated society were finally laid. He explains how their ancestors' territories and diets rarely overlapped, yet they began to trade, offering what they didn't need for what they desired. As time passed, omnivores adopted both methods, tailoring them to their specific needs, while language spread as a means of communication between the different groups. While the herbivores cultivated the fields, the carnivores continued to hunt. This cooperation and specialization marked the true dawn of their civilization, as permanent settlements began to the landscape. He concludes that while this is the general history of their society, a profound mystery remains: why so many diverse species simultaneously evolved into bipedal walkers. The old scholar admits there are many theories, from shifting climates making the ground warmer to the harsh conditions of the surface forcing those in the trees to descend and adapt. Hearing this, the human pilot raises a finger, suggesting he has a theory of his own. Perhaps they simply found the moon to be beautiful. He imagines the ancestors gazing at the splendor of the night sky, filled with a sudden, unconscious desire to reach out and touch it, standing tall before they even realized what they were doing. The secretary can't help but giggle at such a romantic idea, but the doctor remains pragmatic, noting that prehistoric beast folk likely lacked the color perception to truly appreciate the celestial bodies in such a way. He had concluded his historical discourse, leaving the human to his own reflections. Hitoshi stood by the window, gazing out at the quiet night. The long period of government surveillance and the intensive study of his motor functions had finally come to an end. Soon, his enduring wish to walk freely through the streets of Chemo Society would be granted, though he would still require an official escort for the time being. Below him, the sprawling lights of the Federation city glittered like a fallen galaxy against the dark earth. It had been a monumental journey from his home planet to this distant world, a path fraught with countless errors and misunderstandings since the moment of first contact. Despite the friction of the past, there was a growing hope that they could finally stand together as equals. The prospect of a fresh start, a life lived in harmony with the inhabitants of this world, seemed closer than ever before. However, the transition to this new life was immediately hampered by a physical toll. He looked visibly drained, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion as a sudden ailment took hold of his body. Beside him, Tonaliko watched with a sharp gaze, her concern masked by a stern, almost frustrated demeanor. This unexpected medical crisis forced a detour to the Federation Center's Moloch main hospital, a massive, imposing structure dedicated to the well-being of the city's diverse citizens. Inside the sterile confines of the examination room, he sat passively while the medical staff conducted their assessment. The attending physician, a feline specialist, remarked that perhaps their two species were fundamentally incompatible, as Hitoshi's biology was reacting poorly to the local environment. The doctor suspected that either indigenous bacteria or the chlorine used to sanitize the pools had caused a severe inflammatory reaction in his sensitive mucous membranes. She listened as the doctor clarified that while the inflammation was evident, it was not critical enough to require a long-term hospital stay. Nevertheless, the press secretary remained uneasy, her tail twitching with a lingering anxiety about the risks of keeping him in such a vulnerable state for too long. Ultimately, he was confined to his private quarters, strictly ordered to remain on bed rest until his bandages could be safely removed. He sat alone on the edge of his bed, the vast, starry sky he had so recently admired now obscured by the walls of his forced isolation. He is confined to bed, unable to prepare his own meals or follow the strict dietary requirements of his recovery. Seeing this, the press secretary dons an apron and takes full responsibility for his nutrition, determined to ensure he receives the proper sustenance. She moves into the kitchen area, her mind heavy with a sense of duty. Although he hasn't blamed anyone for his current condition, she cannot shake the feeling of responsibility and hopes that a well-prepared meal might serve as a silent apology. Stepping into the storage area, she is momentarily stunned by the sheer volume and variety of supplies. It is a collection of items unlike anything she has encountered in her life, a testament to the alien nature of his needs. The shelves are packed with an array of meats, vegetables, grains, and even seaweed. It is a staggering display of omnivorous diversity that would put even the most adventurous eaters among her people to shame, containing foods they have never even attempted to consume. Her curiosity leads her to the back shelves, where she finds containers of what he referred to as spices. Despite being told not to disturb them, she picks up a piece of what she initially thought was dried fish, only to find it as hard and unyielding as a wooden plank. This reminds her of the early days of his observation, when his dietary needs were a complete mystery. She recalls watching him intently, noting how they had initially resorted to offering him a bit of everything just to see what his biology could handle before they understood his true requirements. He had always been gracious, accepting their offerings with a nod or a grunt of appreciation. Even when the appearance or scent of the food was clearly foreign to him, he would try it anyway, using these shared meals as a bridge of communication before he had mastered their tongue. Returning to the present, she decides to take a risk and sample one of the small, dried morsels herself. While the initial texture is surprisingly pleasant, the sharp, biting heat of the spice quickly catches her off guard, leaving her to wonder at the intensity of the flavors he enjoys. The Moloch General Hospital stands as a silent sentinel under the night sky, its imposing walls housing those in need of urgent care. Inside its sterile walls, she tosses and turns in a feverish sleep, haunted by the memory of a burning sensation she can only describe as the flames of hell, while the physician monitors her vitals. As she finally settles into a deeper rest, the doctor sits by her bedside, reflecting on the unintended consequences of their research and the deep concern the human pilot showed for her well-being. She remains haunted by the experience, even in her dreams, her mind fixated on the impossible heat she swallowed and the baffling nature of a creature that consumed such things regularly. He continues his clinical assessment, noting that the human's resistance to toxins like caffeine, alcohol, and even certain vegetables far exceeds any known species in their world. She questions the evolutionary necessity of such a seemingly useless and painful trait, but he reminds her that the survival of the human's ancestors was never a simple matter, requiring every advantage possible. He looks out toward the distant horizon, musing that this very ability to consume anything is what allowed the humans to roam the world, moving from forests to plains whenever their environment failed them. The gathered data further supports this, highlighting a species defined by incredible physical endurance and a unique lack of fur that, when paired with their tools, allows them to adapt to any corner of the globe. He gazes out at the night sky, pointing toward the distant glimmers. He muses that the human's casual use of the term starry sky reveals a deep, ancestral connection to the cosmos, suggesting they mastered celestial navigation long before his own kind. His thoughts drift to how this ancient mastery allowed them to dominate any environment they encountered, ruthlessly dismantling local ecological hierarchies to pave the way for their own expansion. They were a species on a relentless march, standing triumphant over the massive carcasses of beasts that once ruled the land, driven by an insatiable need to claim the entire world as their own. This is the true nature of the creature they have brought among them, the undisputed apex primate of its homeworld. While he contemplates these grim truths, she remains motionless in her hospital bed, the weight of the silence in the infirmary hanging heavy in the air. Sitting by her side, he admits he must carefully curate his official report. He intends to soften his description of the human's nature to ensure no one views the guest as the terrifying force of nature he truly represents. He continues, his expression hardening as he explains that for the human's own protection, the plan to grant him unrestricted freedom to live anywhere on the planet has been put on hold indefinitely. As he delivers this decree elsewhere, the news is met with shock by some, but the officials remain firm, declaring that the center will maintain strict control over the human and implement a new, more restrictive system if necessary. They discuss the grim new reality of the situation. Dr. Drill explains that while respect will be maintained, Hitoshi's freedom is now a thing of the past. Tonaliko realizes with a heavy heart that they are reverting to the cold, clinical observation of the initial research phase. This shift in policy brings back memories of the early days, where every movement of the human was scrutinized. Despite his ability to speak their tongue, the underlying truth remains. He is an enigma from the stars, and the risk he poses necessitates constant, unblinking eyes upon him. The weight of this responsibility is immense, as any lapse in their vigilance could prove fatal for the specimen. Such a loss is unacceptable to the Federation, cementing his status as a prisoner of his own biology. Frustration boils over for the press secretary, her composure shattering as she leaves the meeting. Outside, the imposing spires of the Moloch General Hospital loom over the Federation Center, a silent witness to the growing tension. Within the sterile walls of a consultation room, she sits across from a physician, her spirit dampened. When offered a return to her normal routine and diet upon discharge, she admits that the very thought of food is currently repulsive to her. The doctor observes her patient with a clinical detachment, her mind drifting back to the human subject. She concludes that the creature's inherent abnormality is undeniable and warns against any further attempts to replicate its alien dietary requirements. She cannot stay silent any longer, rising to her feet to defend the one they call a monster. With a voice full of conviction, she argues that the humans are sincere, kind, and possess an intelligence that commands respect, pleading for them to see beyond the label of beast. The physician remains unmoved, her gaze hardening as she reaches a final, grim conclusion. To her, the creature is a monster not because of malice or disease, but because of its unnatural fragility and a level of purity that defies the laws of nature she has spent her life studying. He continues his assessment, his voice heavy with the conviction that Hitoshi is a biological anomaly. He argues that such a creature is fundamentally incompatible with their world, a potential blight that could destabilize the very ecology of their city. To him, the Hito is a being that simply should not exist here. While his words carry the weight of medical authority, they're ultimately dismissed as a personal, biased perspective. High above the hospital floor, Tonoliko lies motionless in her bed, a silent witness to the lack of true understanding regarding Hitoshi's biology. The gaps in their knowledge are vast, leaving room for fear to take root where science has yet to reach. She reflects on this harsh judgment, her mind drifting back to her own first encounter with the human. She admits to herself that her initial reaction wasn't so different from the doctor's, a mix of shock and instinctive wariness. Yet, she realizes she is in no position to condemn the physician for a fear she once shared, even as she struggles to reconcile her duty with her growing empathy. This internal conflict mirrors the growing unease among the populace. As crowds of citizens gather in the streets, there murmurs a low tide of uncertainty. Despite official government assurances of Hitoshi's peaceful nature, the doctor's grim prognosis resonates with a public already on edge. The fear of the unknown is a contagion, spreading far more easily than any biological threat. Amidst this atmosphere of doubt, a young nurse quietly enters the recovery room, her presence a soft interruption to Tonoliko's heavy thoughts. She carries a small, wrapped package, presenting it with a cheerful smile as a gift from Hitoshi himself. The nurse notes the incredible, enticing aroma wafting from the box, though she adds that because it resembles food, it had to undergo rigorous safety inspections before being allowed into the ward. The gesture catches Tonoliko completely off guard, her eyes widening in genuine surprise. Her astonishment only grows when the nurse mentions an accompanying letter. The realization that Hitoshi possesses the complex cognitive ability to write is a startling reminder of his humanity. He had sat alone, carefully penning his thoughts with a focused intensity, unaware of the stir his gift would cause. As Tonoliko reads his words, she finds a sincere apology for the recent turmoil. He explains with meticulous care that he should have been more forthcoming about his own biology, acknowledging that certain substances harmless to him could be toxic to the chemo, a bridge of understanding built through simple, honesty. She continues reading the letter, where Hitoshi explains the vast differences between their world's ecosystems. He details his long process of experimentation, trying to determine if he could process local ingredients to recreate a dish from his home that her people could safely enjoy. This led him to create the bowl of porridge now sitting before her. He explains in his writing that he carefully selected items that, while alien, bore a striking resemblance to the food of his own kind. He goes on to describe the preparation, mentioning how he added a savory broth and flakes of dried fish. His hope was that this specific blend would aid her digestion and speed her recovery during her stay in the hospital. As the aroma wafts through the room, the attending nurse and a colleague can't help but comment on the delightful scent. Hitoshi's letter reveals his thoughtfulness, noting his understanding that for her species, the olfactory experience is often more vital than the taste itself. Slowly, she lifts a spoonful to her mouth. The first taste is a quiet revelation, a blend of unfamiliar textures and a warmth that speaks of home, even if it isn't hers. The sheer kindness of the gesture, combined with the comforting flavor, brings tears to her eyes, much to the surprise of the nurse. The letter concludes with a somber reflection on how he left his own world behind, prepared for the worst, only to find himself trying to connect here. Elsewhere in the facility, Dr. Drill and the other officials examine the remnants of the meal, realizing the significance of the gesture. They discuss how this food, which they initially viewed with suspicion, was actually a peace offering sent by Hitoshi to bridge the divide between their cultures. While he sits in solitary confinement, gazing out at a world that fears him, the impact of his gift ripples through the hospital ward. Despite being despised and isolated from everyone, he has managed to share a piece of his heart with those who see him as a monster. He stands alone, silhouetted against the glow of the city beyond his quarantine window. To the world outside, he remains a mystery, a creature of legend and fear, Yet here he is, a solitary figure watching the lights of civilization not his own. While he contemplates his isolation, Tonaliko is overcome with emotion, tears streaming down her face as she savors the porridge he prepared. The young ones around her clamor for a taste, their innocent greed contrasting with the profound weight of the moment that she finds almost too painful to dwell upon. She finds comfort in this small act of kindness, a miracle in itself considering the vast, cold emptiness of space he traversed to reach this world. Despite the impossible distance and the bravery required for such a journey, his arrival has sparked a change that no one could have predicted. His period of quiet isolation is suddenly broken as medical staff hurry through the corridors. An urgent patient has arrived, and the sterile halls echo with the frantic energy of those dedicated to healing. Amidst this bustle, the human sits patiently as a physician carefully unwinds the bandages from his head. As the last layer falls away, he blinks, his gaze sharp and alert, signaling a recovery that the doctor notes is proceeding ahead of schedule. He is soon visited by Tonaliko and Dr. Drill, her expression brightening the moment she sees him standing on his own. She admits that her own recent ailment was merely a minor case of food poisoning and expresses her sincere gratitude for his recovery, to which he responds warmly, noting that he feels significantly better thanks to the kindness shown to him. As the pair speaks, Dr. Drill leads a group of high-ranking officials through the facility, their footsteps heavy with the weight of their decision. He announces that the preliminary ecological study of the visitor has reached its conclusion, despite the numerous obstacles they faced along the way. Standing side by side with Tonaliko, the pilot looks toward a future where the two worlds might finally understand one another. The officials have decided to transition to a comprehensive study of his home planet, Earth, recognizing that despite the cosmic distance, their societies and environments share a startling number of similarities. Hitoshi reaches out to shake hands with a small feline official, a gesture of goodwill that bridges the gap between their species. Nearby, Tonaliko sips her tea, reflecting on how the fear of the unknown is precisely what provides the opportunity to truly understand one another. She realizes that the more they learn about the human, the less reason there will be to fear him. He stands at the center of the room, surrounded by the inspection commission as they pore over documents and maps. The goal of this gathering is clear: to find a way for him to live freely on this planet, ensuring he never has to face the cold walls of the cell again. As the meeting draws to a close, the officials gather their papers, satisfied with the day's progress. It was a simple introduction, a first step toward a shared future, and with the formal business concluded, they can finally rest. Leaving the sterile confines of the facility behind, he and Tonaliko step out into the cool evening air. Behind them, Dr. Drill watches them go, his gaze turning toward the sky as he remarks on the beauty of the full moon that will grace the night. They walk together across the rolling hills, the sun having long since dipped below the horizon. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, he looks up to see the stars scattered across the dark expanse, a sight that fills him with a quiet, profound joy. Standing together under the silver glow of the massive moon, the two of them find a moment of peace. It is a testament to the beauty of mutual understanding, a quiet end to a day that marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Director Leon's voice thunders through the assembly hall, his face contorted with rage as he denounces the human visitor. He argues that such a creature, having dominated its own planet, is a fundamental threat to their very existence and culture. To him, the human is nothing more than a harbinger of misfortune that must be expelled from their world immediately to prevent the corruption of their society. He continues his aggressive rhetoric, refusing to yield his position despite the growing controversy surrounding his stance. From the sidelines, Tonaliko watches the spectacle, noting how the director clings to his authority by fueling the flames of fear and condemnation against the outsider. She narrows her eyes in frustration, disgusted by his lack of gratitude. It is clear to her that he is intentionally oversimplifying the situation, dismissing every complex interaction and potential benefit as a mere misunderstanding to suit his xenophobic narrative. Turning her gaze away from the podium, she spots a figure in the shadows and realizes that Leon's boldness stems from having powerful allies backing his cause. This supporter is none other than Chairman Labra, the head of the Chemo Central Federation, who stands composed and smiling despite the heated atmosphere. Flanked by his stern-faced security detail, the chairman exudes an air of calm authority that contrasts sharply with Leon's frantic shouting. When Tonaliko approaches him to plead for intervention, he dismisses her concerns with a polite but firm claim that his hands are tied by protocol. As months pass, the political landscape remains fractured. While some factions strive to build friendly relations with the human, the parliament remains deeply divided, haunted by lingering doubts and the shadow of Leon's influence. Outside the halls of power, the unrest among the populace begins to simmer, reflecting the growing distrust that the parliament's words are failing to soothe. Though the authorities have managed to suppress the initial waves of agitation, there is a palpable sense that their control is weakening as the public skepticism turns into a slow-burning fire. The depth of this animosity is laid bare in the streets, where a crude, battered effigy of a human lies discarded amidst the dirt. The mystery surrounding the visitor remains a volatile spark, and the grim realization takes hold. If the situation reaches a breaking point before the truth is revealed, the chance for peace will be lost forever. He walks with the high-ranking officials of the inspection commission, now dressed in a formal suit that mirrors their own. They discuss the urgent need to dispel the rumors and confusion surrounding his arrival, realizing that simply shielding him from the public is no longer a viable option. Outside, the specialized facility where these high-stakes negotiations take place sits quietly under the open sky, its rounded architecture a testament to the advanced society of the animal folk. Within the laboratory, the human's original flight suit is prepared for a critical demonstration. A small, brilliant light flickers to life on the dark visor as the internal systems transition to a standby state, ready to interface with the world around it. They watch with wide-eyed anticipation as the suit's technology begins to hum with life. Tonaliko and her companions are visibly startled by the sudden response, their initial skepticism replaced by a growing sense of wonder. He stands at the center of the room, once again encased in the pressurized suit that carried him through the void of space. The officials explain to the gathered crowd that this garment is more than just clothing. It is a sophisticated computing machine, a pinnacle of human technological achievement. It begins to whir and click as the human initiates a data transfer, a gesture of trust intended to bridge the gap between their species. The sudden burst of light and sound from the suit's projectors causes the nearby officials to recoil in surprise. The room is suddenly transformed as a massive holographic display erupts from the suit, projecting a collage of human history and achievement. The animal folk are silenced by the sight of sprawling metropolises, ancient pyramids, and the iconic landmarks of a world they never knew existed. They can hardly believe their eyes as they scan the vibrant images of human cities, marveling at the sheer scale of the architecture and the density of the population. The officials exchange hushed, frantic questions, wondering how such a vast and complex civilization could have been condensed into the memory of a single machine. They continue to process the images of the human world, their minds racing with the implications. Tonaliko observes the towering buildings and advanced transport systems, realizing just how much information their government is desperate to acquire. The sheer scale and complexity of human society are far beyond anything they had imagined. As she watches them, the officials swarm Hitoshi, their curiosity reaching a fever pitch. They point at his notebook, demanding to know the names of the objects they've seen and how they function. Hitoshi, limited by the language barrier, tries his best to explain through written symbols and simple gestures. While they're preoccupied with the Hito, a personal crisis erupts as the young girl wails in distress. She clings to Tonaliko, crying out that things will never be the same and that their days of simple play are over. The weight of the world's sudden changes has finally reached the youngest among them, manifesting as a raw, emotional outburst. As she is comforted, the focus shifts back to the monumental task at hand. The government has decreed that they must learn the alien language spoken by the Hito. A vision of a quiet human street serves as a reminder of the vast, silent world they're now compelled to understand and communicate with. To facilitate this, a specialized room is prepared with the necessary tools for linguistic analysis. A gramophone sits ready to record spoken words. A typewriter is poised for transcription, and official forms are laid out, awaiting the data that will bridge the gap between two civilizations. Soon after, the expert tasked with this mission arrives. Professor Phoenix, a renowned speech linguist, enters the facility with a sharp gaze and a sense of professional purpose. He expresses a deep interest in hearing the unprecedented sounds of the alien tongue, eager to begin the work of decoding it. He immediately gets to work, striking a discordant note on a piano that echoes through the room, startling the nearby officials. They whisper among themselves about his legendary perfect pitch, confident that if anyone can translate Hitoshi's spoken words into a written script, it is him. As the professor begins his analysis, Tonaliko remains optimistic, assuring her colleagues that the probability of success is high. However, an elderly official remains skeptical, acknowledging that while understanding the Hito is vital, the path to mastering such a complex, foreign language will be incredibly difficult. Professor Phoenix strikes a series of keys on the instrument, the sharp notes echoing through the sterile room as the officials look on. They discuss the findings of their previous research, noting that the human's vocal range is significantly narrower than their own, which should theoretically make his speech simpler to analyze. She adjusts her glasses, explaining that while it might be difficult for the human to mimic their complex sounds, they are theoretically capable of learning to speak his tongue. The prospect of bridging the communication gap fills the room with a tense, scholarly anticipation. He sits patiently in the center of the room as the proposal is made to begin with a simple children's story. With a steady gaze, he expresses his own desire to hear them speak, ready to begin the exchange that could change the course of their shared history. As he begins to recite the ancient tale of the bamboo cutter, the chemo listeners are visibly taken aback. The sounds emerging from him are unlike anything they expected, leaving the linguists and officials in a state of stunned, wide-eyed confusion. The narrative of the Moon Princess unfolds through his words, yet to his audience, it hardly sounds like a language at all. They find themselves questioning if these melodic, rhythmic sounds could truly be a form of communication, as the imagery of the story contrasts sharply with their bewilderment. She reaches out, her hand trembling as she feels the intense vibrations in his throat while he speaks. It feels to her as if a complex musical instrument has been integrated into his very being, a realization that leaves the other officials reeling as they connect these sounds to the music they heard in the Human City recordings. They conclude that while his pitch range is limited, the sheer variety of tones he can produce through the movement of his throat and mouth is staggering. It is a level of vocal dexterity that far surpasses their own, making the task of understanding the sequence of his intonations feel nearly impossible. She eventually slumps over her instrument in frustration, the weight of the challenge finally sinking in. Despite piecing together the tragic end of the story about the princess who returned to the moon, she realizes she may have underestimated the vast, melodic gulf between their species. She listened as the elderly doctor pointed out that while written communication was an option, it demanded an exhausting amount of effort from the human. He suggested that they might find better results by relying on visual aids and charts to bridge the gap. The press secretary stood silently to the side, her gaze fixed downward as she contemplated the futility of their current approach. She felt that they shouldn't be wasting so much energy trying to force the human to reproduce their own complex language. Looking toward her colleagues, she voiced a sudden, heavy realization. Perhaps the human was simply lonely, isolated by the very barrier they were struggling to break. The thought weighed heavily on her, as she recalled the profound sense of isolation she had felt when first glimpsing the remnants of a civilization. Even though her actions might have seemed impulsive, seeing his world had changed her perspective. The memory of those towering structures and the alien script had triggered a deep-seated anxiety within her. It was as if the mere sight of something so foreign had severed her connection to everything familiar, leaving her adrift. The elderly doctor nodded in solemn agreement, observing that the human must feel a similar crushing solitude. He was surrounded by people who, despite their best intentions, were fundamentally unable to speak his language or understand his heart. The linguist added that even if a handful of them managed to master the human tongue, certain emotions were bound to the resonance of the voice itself. Written words, she noted, could never fully capture the depth of feeling conveyed through speech. In the quiet of the room, the human stood before the recording device, a silent testament to the debt they now owed him. They felt a growing responsibility to repay him for his tireless attempts to bridge the gap between their two worlds. The pilot's presence had clearly left a mark on the elderly doctor. He reflected on his own initial resistance, admitting a sense of disbelief at how he had sought excuses to shy away from the daunting prospect of new knowledge. His sentiment was echoed by the professor, who adjusted her collar with a look of quiet shame. She confessed to feeling a similar regret for having kept such a distance from their visitor from afar. This collective change of heart quickly spread through the populace like a wildfire. Voices rose from the crowd as citizens eagerly volunteered to join the effort, their shouts of commitment filling the air. Because they realized that their own vocal cords were insufficient to replicate the pilot's unique speech, the officials began a period of rigorous, disciplined training. They practiced phonetic scales tirelessly and even utilized mechanical stilts to ensure they could meet him at eye level, determined to bridge the physical and linguistic gap between their species. These efforts eventually culminated at a grand assembly hall, its modern facade standing as a testament to the unity they sought to achieve. Inside the quiet auditorium, the press secretary took her place, a serene smile on her face as she officially welcomed the pilot to the gathering. Behind her, the doctor sat in silent anticipation alongside their guest of honor. Surrounding them were representatives from across the city, their expressions solemn and respectful. They had gathered to present a gift, a gesture of deep gratitude for the immense labor the human had undertaken to master their own complex tongue. As the lights dimmed, the choir of officials stood in perfect formation on the stage, a pianist poised at the keys. Without another word, the performance began. She stands ready as the performance begins, the title Princess Kaguya displayed prominently, crediting the Hito Research Committee for the production. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she prepares to guide the audience through the ancient human tale. The story opens with a miracle in the forest, where an elderly couple discovers a tiny, glowing girl hidden inside a stalk of bamboo, growing into a radiant young woman. She fills the humble home of her adoptive parents with warmth and laughter. Her legendary beauty soon attracts a crowd of noble suitors, each one desperate to win her heart with grand gestures and noble titles. She begins to feel a heavy sadness as the moon waxes full, tearfully confessing to her parents that she does not belong to this world. Watching in despair, the old couple sees a celestial procession descend from the stars to reclaim her and carry her back to the moon. But the performer's version of the story refuses to end in tragedy. In a display of scientific might and collective will, they depict the people constructing a massive lunar cannon. From the blueprints to the final assembly, the scene culminates in a defiant shot fired at the moon, symbolizing their absolute resolve to bring the princess back to Earth. They watched as a brilliant light erupted, centered on a celestial body that bore a strangely defiant expression. The spectacle reached a fever pitch as a projectile struck the lunar surface, prompting the performers to dance with wild, celebratory abandon amidst the flashing lights. However, the grand finale quickly spiraled into chaos. The elaborate stage sets began to crumble, sending the actors into a panicked scramble as they realized the performance was collapsing around them. The inspection commission, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity and the disastrous conclusion of the play, collapsed in a heap of exhaustion, admitting they had reached their absolute limit. Amidst the wreckage on stage, Tonaliko struggled to catch her breath, her hair disheveled, and her expression one of pure devastation. She lamented that despite all their preparation, the story had failed to reach its intended conclusion and the message had been lost in a mechanical failure. From the silence of the darkened theater, she looked out toward the few remaining spectators, her heart heavy with the belief that they had failed to properly honor the guest of honor and repay the debt they felt they owed him. She remained slumped on the floor, but her despair was suddenly interrupted by a series of sharp, rhythmic percussions that echoed through the hollow hall, leaving her confused by the harshness of the sound. The source of the noise was Hitoshi himself, who had risen to his feet to offer a standing ovation, his face bright with genuine appreciation while the doctor beside him watched in stunned, sweating silence. He expresses deep gratitude to everyone involved, shaking hands with the officials. Despite the initial doubts about the performance's success, his sincere thanks and the effort he put into his speech, limited as it was by his grasp of the language, leave a lasting impression on the group. As the group disperses, Professor Phoenix observes that Hitoshi handled the situation with remarkable maturity and sincerity. Tonaliko is surprised by this high praise, but the professor explains he is simply trying to follow her lead by viewing the world through the human's eyes. Standing alone for a moment, the weight of his unique existence becomes palpable. Professor Phoenix reflects that while he is no astrophysicist, if the human's words are true, his home world is likely gone forever, leaving him as the sole speaker of a language that will eventually perish with him. The sheer scale of his isolation and the pressure of being the last of his kind is a burden that others can scarcely imagine, yet he carries it forward into this new world. Later, he kneels to speak with the professor, who holds a long-tailed bird. They reflect on how their theatrical efforts, however small or seemingly absurd, manage to lighten the heavy burden he carries, proving that even a simple performance can offer a glimmer of connection and hope. A sense of peace settles over him as he closes his eyes, listening to the quiet of the world around him. His voice, which was once destined to be lost in the vast, silent emptiness of space, has finally found a place to resonate and belong here, on this alien planet. The legacy of their shared experience takes on a legendary quality, much like a distorted retelling of an old folk tale. One wonders what the princess of legend would think, seeing her friends follow her all the way to the moon in this strange, new version of her story that they have created together. High above, a bird soars into the clear sky, symbolizing a new beginning for them all. If these seemingly nonsensical actions have truly forged a deeper bond between their species on a fundamental level, then this entire endeavor can be considered a monumental success, turning a simple play into a bridge between worlds that will stand the test of time. Far from the political intrigue surrounding the human, a young horse named Stalio works diligently on his family's farm, hoisting heavy sacks with ease. His parents watch with pride, his mother remarking that he will make an excellent courier one day, while the youth himself finds the labor effortless. His father, a mountain of muscle, laughs off the need for academic pursuits, insisting that strength is their true currency and that no one can haul freight better than their kind. As a steam train chugs across the distant horizon, the patriarch dismisses the mechanical marvel, complaining of the coal stench and asserting that manual labor remains the superior path. With the morning chores finished, the young colt bids his family farewell and begins the trek towards school. He soon catches up with his classmates, who are busy discussing their assignments. While some have completed their work, others admit to neglecting it entirely. He playfully lunges at them, but the small cat in the group warns him that failing to study might leave him with no choice but to become a lowly train conductor, a fate he finds laughable. As they walk on, The young feline reflects bitterly on the rigid social structure, believing that since their species dictates their destiny, education is merely a futile exercise. She stares at the flyer in disbelief. The news that the legendary Hito is visiting her school today hitting her like a physical blow. The announcement is clear. The human will be arriving this very day, a prospect that seems almost impossible to process. Her shock erupts into a deafening cry that echoes across the landscape, a mixture of terror and excitement that pierces the morning air. Meanwhile, at the grand residence of the Chemo Central Federation, the focus shifts to the high-level diplomatic efforts surrounding the visitor. Officials inquire about the progress of the interspecies study, seeking updates on the integration process. Tonaliko reports to the chairman, explaining that their primary objective is to decode the Hito's language as the first step to truly grasping the nature of his civilization. In the research labs, Professor Phoenix is already deep into this linguistic bridge building, working closely with the visitor to find common ground. The chairman acknowledges the scale of the ambitious project, but reminds her that they cannot afford to slow down the study of the Hito's world. He emphasizes the urgency of the situation, and Tonaliko nods in understanding, aware of the political pressure mounting behind the scenes. In the quiet of the study room, the professor guides the human through the nuances of their tongue, cautioning him that certain idioms, like a wolf in sheep's clothing, could be misinterpreted by the public. He explains that because the Hito is a representative of his civilization, his choice of words requires careful selection. He listens in silence, realizing the weight of his position. As the sole representative of his kind, every word he utters will shape the future of the relationship between their two worlds. The realization that his conversations with the populace will define their future together weighs heavily upon him. He was the subject of a new, experimental plan. The setting was the Pandobaratnya Elementary School, a quiet institution nestled in the Western Forest District of the Central Federation. His arrival was watched closely by the press secretary, who harbored a mix of anticipation and dread as the human's visit began, knowing the reality of the situation would likely diverge from official expectations. He was immediately swarmed by the children, their youthful energy overwhelming him as a young horsefolk student hoisted him into the air, mocking the perceived physical weakness of the legendary Hito. This chaotic reception did not deter Chairman Labra, who remained convinced of strategy. He argued that interacting with children, who lacked the hidden motives and social restraints of adults, would allow the human to express himself more authentically. They poked and prodded at his skin with intense curiosity, some even worrying aloud that touching him might spread a strange, human-loving infection that had supposedly already compromised the government. He was eventually led to the front of the classroom, where the teacher introduced him, sternly reminding the class to maintain their manners and refrain from biting or scratching their interstellar visitor. She barked at the unruly students, clarifying that the human was there to observe their behavior and learning environment, not to be treated as a mere curiosity for their amusement. She watched as he sat at a desk and began to bridge the communication gap by writing in a notebook, explaining to a curious student that while the spoken tongue was still developing, he could converse quite well through the written word. He sits amidst a flurry of raised hands and eager voices. The children are buzzing with excitement, marveling at his intelligence and clamoring for his attention with endless questions. One young student leans in close, her curiosity getting the better of her as she bluntly asks why he is completely hairless except for the top of his head. In response, he carefully pens an explanation on his notepad, detailing how his species evolved not for temperature regulation like theirs, but to thrive in heat. He explains that the lack of fur allows him to remain active in scorching climates without losing consciousness, a revelation that leaves the children wide-eyed at the vast differences between their kinds. The educational atmosphere is suddenly pierced by a sharp reprimand from a teacher, who warns the students that even a single conversation could turn them into human lovers. Despite the stern warning, the children are more fascinated by the fact that he communicates through writing rather than speech. As one child takes a curious sniff of his suit, he continues his written lecture, explaining that the human diet is incredibly diverse, even more so than typical omnivores. This variety, he notes, is why his scent might seem unique, as their lifestyle and food choices are reflected in their natural body odor. He remains patient as the questions continue to pour in, writing that human intelligence is not tied to race, and that they all belong to a single species, despite variations in skin tone and physique across different regions. The children lean in, captivated, asking about the climate of his homeworld and the different types of people who live there. The interrogation becomes a chaotic barrage of inquiries about his age, his origin, and even the existence of human females, with one child even demanding to see a tail he doesn't possess. Overwhelmed by the sheer volume of curiosity, he quickly scribbles a plea for them to wait just a moment. Watching the scene unfold from a distance, Tonaliko adjusts her glasses, her expression unreadable. She realizes that the children's blunt, straightforward nature is uncovering a perspective on the human that the adults with all their prejudices, had completely overlooked. She watched from the sidelines as the children swarmed the visitor, their excitement far surpassing any interest they had in their usual lessons. It was a rare opportunity to observe and perhaps gain a deeper understanding of the world the human had left behind. They were not all convinced of his benign nature. However, one young horse, fueled by his father's warnings, whispered to his peers that the human was a deceiver who had supposedly seized control of the government, despite a classmate's insistence that he seemed like a decent person. He continued his grim speculation, arguing that a hairless creature couldn't possibly be good. He wondered aloud if their own evolution would have taken a darker turn under different circumstances, even as the others grew uneasy and suggested returning to the main group. The boy's imagination ran wild, and he loudly proclaimed a terrifying theory. Perhaps humans were the sole survivors of their world because they had devoured all their friends. Hitoshi stood silently nearby, the weight of the accusation hanging in the air. A sudden, furious roar shattered the boy's dark fantasy as a small, shadowy figure erupted in anger, berating him for his disrespectful words. The outburst left the young horse stunned and trembling, while the human remained a calm, distant observer of the chaos. He chose that moment to shift the conversation, holding up a new message that introduced a concept foreign to the children: the idea of a country. While they saw only one species before them, he explained that his people were divided into many distinct nations. His written words detailed a world that, at its height, boasted over 200 separate countries. One of the students compared this to their own world, noting that while they belonged to the Central Federation, there were other powers like the Meowska Kingdom and the Northern Bear Alliance spread across the continents. The revelation of such vast numbers left the students in a state of pure shock. They struggled to comprehend the existence of 200 nations and thousands of different languages, with one overwhelmed child pleading for him to just stick to one. They stare in wide-eyed wonder as the human displays images of his world's legends and stories on a glowing screen. Hitoshi explains that these are just a few examples of the vast cultural tapestry humanity once wove, filled with heroes and distant stars. Tonaliko ponders this, her mind racing as she realizes that the Japanese they heard was merely one of thousands, alongside others like English. The sheer scale of it is almost too much to grasp, a realization that nearly overwhelms her as she considers the complexity of human history. Looking out over the sprawling city, Hitoshi admits that seeing their home filled him with an indescribable nostalgia. He explains that while they are all of one kind, their world is divided into many nations and cultures, making every day a journey of discovery and new encounters. Despite the awe, Stalio remains defiant, his stubbornness drawing a sharp rebuke from his teacher. Tonaliko watches silently as the young horse insists he still wants to hear more from the human, his curiosity finally outweighing his suspicion. Suddenly, the human moves with surprising speed, hoisting the startled boy into the air. Stalio lets out a cry of shock as he is lifted off his feet, the sudden physical contact catching everyone off guard. He then settles onto the ground, pulling the boy into his lap and brandishing a pen and paper. Stalio struggles and shouts, demanding to know what the human is doing, but Hitoshi remains calm and focused. The human begins to write, his hand moving with practiced ease across the page. As the other children cry out in jealousy at the special treatment, Hitoshi issues a playful challenge. Stalio can ask anything he wants, but he won't be released until he does. As the ink flows, Hitoshi explains that he studied their language with great diligence because of his deep desire to communicate with them. Stunned by the sight of his own script being written by a human hand, Stalio can only ask how such a thing is even possible. He gritted his teeth, the frustration boiling over as he demanded to know which country this English language even came from. Scattered across the table were the remnants of their lesson, sheets of paper covered in the strange, angular script of a world far beyond his own. One particular page spoke of a fourth land, a place blessed with a magnificent and untamed nature, hinting at the vastness of a knowledge he was being asked to absorb. The young horsefolk couldn't contain his outburst any longer, shouting about the pointlessness of studying a stupid planet, while Tonaliko watched the exchange with growing unease. He finally snapped, telling the human to just be quiet. In response, the pilot calmly held up a handwritten note, pointedly asking if the boy intended to spend his entire future doing nothing but physical exercise. He suggested that if the boy found learning so useless, perhaps he should just stick to push-ups. He stared at the paper, his brow furrowed in confusion as the human explained that these subjects were the foundation for his future cognitive development. Even if he never used a specific equation again, the act of solving it would train his mind to process information more efficiently, much like a muscle. A small, knowing smile played on the pilot's lips as he considered how every subject, from languages and art to the hard sciences, was a vital piece of a much larger puzzle. Holding up a final message, he emphasized that every bit of knowledge would eventually serve as fuel for the boy's future endeavors. With a firm but encouraging tone, The note urged him to commit himself to his studies. He listens as Tonaliko expresses her surprise, noting that it seems he truly became a student again in this moment. She teases him, asking if Earth really had homework and suggesting that, based on his own words, he might have been quite the lazy student himself. This playful accusation brings back memories of his youth, where he and his peers acted like typical children, chasing one another and worrying about nothing at all. It was a time of simple chaos and shared laughter. Nearby, a group of young students gathers around a collection of maps spread across the floor, their eyes wide with wonder. They marvel at the strange world he comes from, expressing a deep desire to visit such a peculiar planet one day. One curious girl looks up at him, her voice filled with genuine inquiry as she asks how his people managed to create so many different countries. He explains that it began with families who cherished and protected one another. Over countless generations, these small bonds grew and evolved, eventually coalescing into the complex civilizations and nations they see on the maps. Watching this exchange, Tonaliko finds the concept of humans surprisingly endearing. She privately muses that perhaps they simply enjoyed the sound of their own melodic language so much that they kept expanding their borders and creating new nations just to have more reasons to speak. Outside the school, the day's lessons draw to a close as the students congregate near the entrance, the unique architecture of the building looming behind them. Having finished his task for the day, he stands on the dirt path and offers a final wave to the young boy he helped. With a carriage waiting in the distance, he prepares to depart, leaving the school grounds behind. He had left a lasting impression on the young students, who now walked along the dirt path, their voices filled with excitement. One child exclaimed how incredible the human had been, while another expressed a newfound dream of one day visiting the distant world he called home. The young horse pondered the human's words, staring off into the distance with a contemplative look. He mused to himself about how far one's education might actually lead, wondering if the path to the stars was paved with the very lessons they were learning in the classroom. Around him, his peers were equally inspired, their ambitions suddenly reaching far beyond their small village. One girl declared her intent to study hard so she could build nations of her own, while a studious cat boy noted he had never stopped, and a more reluctant companion promised to finally apply himself, starting tomorrow, of course. As the sun continued its journey across the sky, the weight of these new aspirations began to settle into the mundane reality of daily life. A final, lingering thought drifted through the air, a quiet resolution to perhaps tackle the upcoming week's homework, leaving the future of their world hanging in the balance of their youthful determination. As the days pass, the human known as Hitoshi continues to bridge the gap between his world and this one, sharing stories and knowledge with young Stalio. While his movements remain somewhat restricted, the flow of information is steady, and even Tonaliko finds herself hoping that these simple interactions might bring the pilot some measure of peace amidst the ongoing diplomatic trials. The human's presence is slowly becoming a catalyst for change, sparking curiosity and new perspectives among the populace. However, this fragile peace is shattered when she receives a staggering invoice addressed to Hitoshi, demanding immediate payment for the astronomical costs of his research and housing. The sheer scale of the sum leaves her breathless, her eyes widening in disbelief as she scans the document. Driven by a sense of injustice, she rushes to the residence of the head of the Federation, her voice echoing through the halls as she demands an explanation for the sudden financial burden. The imposing structure of the residence stands silent, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She confronts Chairman Labra directly, her anger boiling over as she questions the audacity of charging a diplomatic guest for his stay. Labra, caught off guard by her intensity, attempts to soothe her, but her indignation only grows as she points out the absurdity of the situation. The source of the bill reveals himself as Minister Ham, the head of science and industry, who steps forward to claim responsibility. He explains that he was the one who initially funded what he calls this charity case, and now he has decided to withdraw his support and demand repayment. He remains unmoved by her protests, coolly stating that his investment has yet to yield any significant profit. She is left stunned, realizing that the minister views the human's presence as nothing more than a failed business venture, completely disregarding the diplomatic implications. She counters his cold logic, arguing that the value of Hitoshi's presence lies not in technology, but in the rich culture and creativity he has shared over the past few days. To her, these stories and the connection they build are far more precious than any toys or mechanical secrets the minister might desire. This sentiment only enrages the minister, who bellows his true intentions, demanding the secrets of space travel, life-extending hibernation, and advanced energy sources. To him, the damned alien is merely a resource to be exploited for technological gain, and he will accept nothing less than the keys to the stars. He laid out his plan, gesturing toward a flyer for an upcoming event. In 2 months, leaders from across the globe would gather to discuss the encroaching cold, and he intended to make the human the star of a grand symposium. His skepticism was met with immediate resistance from the press secretary. While the chairman questioned what value the creature could possibly offer if it remained tight-lipped, she pleaded for a chance to show the world that the visitor was a friend, not just a resource. 2 months passed in a blur of preparation until the day of the summit finally arrived. The Chemo Central Federation became the focal point of the world, hosting the high-stakes gathering to address the global cooling crisis. Within the grand halls of the venue, powerful figures began to assemble. Chairman Larpo of the Northern Bear Alliance and Chief of Staff Alec of the Eastern Republic noted the abruptness of the summons, even as their host welcomed them with open arms and a practiced smile. He moved through the crowd of dignitaries, whispering of the wonders to come. To the interested ears of Director Leon and other officials, he promised that the human was not only willing but eager to share the advanced technologies of his homeworld. As the final guests took their places around the circular tables, a hush fell over the massive auditorium. The announcement rang out, urging everyone to settle in for the start of the long-awaited presentation. Stepping up to the podium, she looked out at the sea of expectant faces. With the human seated quietly behind her, she took a breath and officially opened the symposium that would decide his fate and the future of their world. Inside a private briefing room, the group gathers to process the fallout of the public announcement. Dr. Drill admits that while Minister Ham's methods are reckless and he failed to consult the other participants, his ability to manipulate public opinion is undeniable. He continues his grim analysis, noting that the industrial sector will likely decide there is no point in hosting the Hito if they don't gain immediate benefits. This shift in sentiment will almost certainly bolster Director Leon and his faction's influence. He listens in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. It becomes clear that to avoid losing political ground to the director, they will be forced to comply with Ham's aggressive demands. She holds up 3 fingers, outlining the specific technological secrets Ham has targeted: the operation of the spacecraft, the mystery of life-extending suspended animation, and the high-density energy source of the Hito civilization. Elsewhere, the minister revels in his perceived victory, having waited for the perfect moment to corner them with these impossible requests. He stares at the list of demands, realizing the danger inherent in the request. The information Ham seeks is classified, even among the Hito, and providing it could inadvertently hand over technology capable of devastating military applications. She looks down, her expression clouded with worry. Even if they manage to navigate this current crisis, she knows the public's appetite for these forbidden technologies will only grow, making future negotiations even more treacherous. It remains suspended in the cold vacuum of space, a silent testament to a superior science. While the government demands access for the sake of planetary security, the vessel hangs just out of reach, a prize that could change the world or destroy it. He remains lost in thought, searching for a middle ground. He wonders if there is any information he can safely share that would be enough to satisfy the public's curiosity and de-escalate the growing political tension. He sits in stoic silence as Minister Ham addresses the gathered assembly, opening the session by praising the advanced energy sources that allowed the Hito civilization to flourish and ascend. Beside him, Tonalico takes a firm stance, shocking the minister by declaring that he has no intention of revealing the technical secrets of that power under any circumstances. This refusal sends a ripple of indignant murmurs through the room, with officials grumbling about such an arrogant start to the negotiations and worrying that failing to master these devices could have dire consequences for the entire planet's environment. Sensing the mounting hostility, she quickly transitions to the next topic, introducing the concept of cold sleep, which she explains is not a natural slumber, but a controlled process of lowering body temperature to extreme levels. The revelation causes Chairman Larpo to recoil in disbelief, questioning how anyone could survive being frozen to the point of death. To clarify the science, she directs their gaze to a large projection of microscopic structures, explaining that the body is preserved by tiny mechanisms known as nanomachines that actively maintain the integrity of the tissues during the freeze. The officials react with visible disgust at the idea of injecting bugs into their bodies, but she counters that these artificial agents replace standard biological functions, allowing a person to survive for many years in stasis. Finally, she notes that utilizing this technology requires the help of a true master currently aboard the Hito ship, a name, Haruko, that causes him to leap from his seat in a state of total shock. He remains frozen as the room erupts into a cacophony of hushed, frantic debate among the officials. They mutter about their dashed hopes for a solution to the global cooling crisis, while others recoil in disgust, branding the Hito's stasis technology a biological and ethical nightmare. The realization that the promised energy source remains tantalizingly out of reach only fuels their growing resentment. Around them, the sentiment is unanimous. Even if they manage to mimic the Hito civilization, they lack the fundamental means to utilize it. The air in the room grows heavy with the weight of their collective failure, and the mounting tension between the two species. Amidst their chaos, she leans in close, her voice a sharp whisper that cuts through his shock. She tells him bluntly that any reason he had for remaining in this world has been reduced to ash, her words a cold reminder of his isolation. Nearby, the Minister of Science watches the exchange with a predatory glint in his eyes, a dark realization dawning on him. Seeing her take control, the Minister then pushes himself up from the table, his movements heavy with disdain. With a final, dismissive remark, he signals the end of his patience, bidding the outsider a cold farewell as he prepares to move the proceedings along. Ignoring his departure, she steps back to the microphone to introduce the final, most ambitious topic of the session. She speaks of a new generation of propulsion technology, a device capable of incredible speeds that can traverse both the atmosphere and the void beyond. A rocket. As she explains their intent to not only describe its principles, but to demonstrate its power, the gravity of the revelation hangs in the air. While she speaks, he remains standing, his gaze fixed downward in a silent, brooding contemplation of the path ahead. Tonaliko stands before the gathered leaders of the world, her voice echoing through the grand hall as she poses a fundamental question about the requirements for escaping the planet's pull and reaching the stars. She illustrates her point with a simple diagram, explaining that if an object is thrown with enough force, it reaches a state where gravity and momentum balance, maintaining a steady orbit at a constant height. As she reveals the staggering speed required, 30,000 Lizkov per hour, a wave of shock ripples through the audience, leaving the bare official gasping in disbelief at such an impossible figure. She doesn't stop there, further explaining that escaping the planet's pull entirely requires an even greater velocity of 42,000 Lizkov per hour, a figure that leaves Hitoshi looking on with a somber, knowing expression. He feels the tension in the room rise as the officials grapple with these astronomical numbers, their whispers filled with doubt about how their civilization could ever achieve such feats. Amidst the growing unease, Minister Ham remains composed, his sharp mind already calculating the limitations of their current steam and electric propulsion systems against the immense power required for spaceflight. The answer to their technological dilemma is then unveiled, a specialized vessel designed to harness the power of pressurized gas expulsion, known simply as a rocket. This ambitious vision of the future stands in stark contrast to the past, where younger, smaller Ham was once just a new face in a humble office, beginning his career alongside a primate colleague. He was once just a newcomer, hunched over a drafting table with a precision that defied his rugged appearance. A colleague leaned over, questioning why a rookie with such talent for technical drawing was wasting his time there, suggesting there were far more lucrative paths for someone of his skill. Despite the skepticism, he continued his work, his hooves moving with a delicate grace as he sketched out complex designs that left the others in the office whispering in awe. Later that night, under the glow of a crescent moon, he shared his true ambition with his friend. When asked if he was serious about reaching the stars, he confirmed his intent to build a transport that would carry them into the vacuum of space, something no one had ever dared to attempt. His companion, though skeptical of the danger, found himself drawn in by the sheer audacity of the dream, especially if there was profit to be found in the heavens. His gaze sharpened as he contemplated the mechanics of the journey. He mused about achieving lift through a controlled, continuous explosion, a concept that seemed madness to most. Looking at a simple bicycle rigged with a primitive thruster, he acknowledged the fundamental challenge. Space was a void, devoid of air or matter to push against, requiring a completely new way to generate power. Out in the open fields, the first prototype roared to life, streaking into the sky as the small group watched in disbelief. He explained the simplicity of the design, where solid fuel was packed into a cylinder and ignited to create thrust. By utilizing the exhaust gases, the craft could propel itself even in the airless reaches of the cosmos, proving that his theories were more than just idle fantasies. He realized that while a simple cylinder could fly, it lacked the control necessary for a true transport. The problem lay in the inability to regulate the intensity of the combustion or to shut it down once started. To make it viable, he needed a specialized chamber that allowed for perfect manipulation of the energy. The quiet of the workshop was suddenly shattered by a frantic cry. A voice echoed through the rafters, calling out to him that a crisis had emerged within the testing bay. Inside the smoke-filled hangar, he struggled against the heat and the failing machinery. The combustion chamber was reaching temperatures that no known alloy could withstand, causing the metal to warp and melt under the immense pressure. He shouted orders, realizing they needed a complex system of pipes to circulate cooling liquid, a delicate balance of extreme temperatures and airtight seals that pushed their current technology to its absolute breaking point. Despite his desperate pleas to keep trying, his supervisor finally called an end to the project. Covered in soot and trembling with exhaustion, he tried to argue that they were close to a breakthrough, that they just needed to find a way to make it perfect. But the older ape remained firm, telling him he had done enough and that it was time to walk away from the wreckage of his dream. He stood frozen as his superior delivered the crushing verdict. The elder primate explained that while the research in his zero-gravity transport was thorough, it ultimately proved that such industries had no place in their world. The risks, he claimed, far outweighed any potential benefit. Ham could only utter a confused questioning of the decision as his dreams were dismantled before his eyes. Continuing the dismissal, the supervisor argued that identifying and discarding useless technologies was a vital service to society. He maintained that wasting time on meaningless research was a drain on their collective progress. Ham listened in silence, his face a mask of quiet despair as his life's work was labeled a societal burden. Despite the rejection of his project, the elder offered a consolation, promising a position that reflected Ham's dedication. He admitted that the results Ham achieved were remarkable, even if the underlying method of propulsion was deemed too complex and impractical. The group of officials began to walk away, leaving the young engineer behind with nothing but a hollow commendation. Years later, the former outcast stood as a man of immense power, overlooking a massive, gleaming projectile that dwarfed his early prototypes. An official congratulated him on his recent promotion to the Ministry of Science and Industry, noting the incredible scale of the current project. They stood on a vast coastal expanse, a dedicated zone for experimental tests that Ham could only have dreamed of in his youth. Nearby, the press secretary prepared to address the gathered crowd. As the final checks for the launch commenced, she announced she would use the remaining time to explain the technical details and take questions from the observers. As she spoke, he leaned in, his eyes burning with a mix of professional envy and desperate curiosity. He demanded to know the secret, the magic that allowed this vessel to conquer the heavens. To him, his own designs had been nothing more than a mess of crooked pipes and uncontrolled fire, and he could not fathom how they had surpassed his limitations. In response to his demand, she detailed a system that used high-pressure pumps to feed fuel and oxidizer into a combustion chamber. She likened the process to a powerful waterfall, creating a high-velocity gas exhaust that provided thrust in both the atmosphere and the airless void of space. The revelation hit him like a physical blow, sending him stumbling backward as the simplicity and elegance of the solution shattered his long-held assumptions. Gasping for air and drenched in a cold sweat, he cried out for her to stop, refusing to believe that such a monumental achievement could be reduced to a single mechanical principle. He insisted there had to be more to it, while the secretary remained perfectly composed, inviting him to continue his inquiry. He roared in defiance, his face slick with sweat as he dismissed the entire project as a farce. To him, the idea that such a machine could actually take flight was nothing short of an impossibility, a direct insult to his years of failed research. Continuing his outburst, the minister insisted that he had seen enough to know such a mechanism was a physical impossibility. Yet, memories of the pilot's earlier explanation lingered. The human had claimed the designs weren't his own, but rather highly reliable assembly instructions provided to him by his people. As the discussion turned to the exotic materials required, the pilot noted that the necessary components were identical to those found on his home world, suggesting they were unique to his people. This revelation only further incensed the minister, who demanded to know the secrets of these alien substances that defied his understanding of chemistry. The human calmly detailed how liquid nitrogen and oxygen served as both oxidizers and coolants for the engine components under high pressure. The minister, however, remained trapped in his own technical dogmas, arguing that no known alloy could survive the intense heat of a combustion chamber for more than a few moments without melting. His eyes widened in a mix of terror and stubborn disbelief, certain that the entire vessel would be reduced to scrap within seconds of ignition. He was convinced that even the slightest imperfection, a single stray hair or a minor pressure fluctuation, would lead to a total structural collapse and a catastrophic explosion. In response to these dire predictions, the pilot simply held up a technical report, his expression unreadable. He maintained that the engineers had poured every ounce of their expertise into the craft, ensuring a level of precision and structural integrity that left no room for the failures the minister so desperately anticipated. Sensing the shift in momentum, the press secretary turned her attention back to the task at hand, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. She reminded everyone that the success of the mission now rested on the meticulous monitoring of the mechanical systems as they prepared for the final sequence. Far across the coastal plains, the silence of the experimental zone was finally broken. The countdown began to echo over the landscape, marking the final seconds before the world would witness the truth. 5, 4. The countdown reaches its final stages as the officials watch in silence. 3. The voice echoes through the launch site. He watches the horizon, his tusks set in a grim line as the final second ticks away. 1. Suddenly, the base of the vessel erupts in a blinding flash of white-hot energy. The ground trembles as the engines roar to life, consuming the launch pad in a violent storm of fire and steam. With a thunderous surge, the rocket pierces the atmosphere, carving a path through the clouds. A thick, billowing plume of white smoke marks its ascent, a testament to the raw power propelling it toward the stars. He observes the fading trail, finally admitting that the Hedo civilization is far more than a mere distant fantasy. The reality of their technological prowess is now undeniable. Nearby, the chairman addresses the gathered crowd, his voice steady and inspiring. He argues that by striving forward, they can eventually close the gap and walk shoulder to shoulder with their visitors. For both species are bound by the same fundamental laws of the universe. Standing beside the pilot, the press secretary brings the event to a formal close. She expresses that there is nothing left to say after such a demonstration, thanking the attendees and declaring the rocket a symbol of the intersection between their two worlds. As the crowd begins to disperse, the minister turns to the elderly doctor. He confesses that he had hoped witnessing such advanced technology would help him cast aside old resentments, but instead, it only highlighted the infinite depth of scientific inquiry. He concludes with a heavy heart that their own efforts were not in vain. They simply hadn't reached far enough yet. He reflects on the immense hurdles of progress, budgets, time, and the shifting tides of politics, noting how many reasons exist to halt research. Looking out over the landscape, he wonders aloud how the Hedo managed to advance so far, acknowledging that while their worlds may differ, they clearly face the same fundamental challenges. His musings are interrupted by the press secretary, who demands he settle the outstanding accounts to avoid their eviction. He remains unfazed, puffing on a cigar as he dismissively retorts that things are never quite that simple, much to her visible frustration. Standing amidst the vast, snowy expanse, he begins to outline the staggering scale of the task ahead, noting the need for specialized factories, parts manufactured with unprecedented precision, and a massive infrastructure to support the workforce. He emphasizes that they must provide adequate housing and resources for everyone involved in this monumental undertaking. Turning his attention to the pilot, he points out that simply seeing a finished product doesn't mean they possess the immediate capability to replicate it. He warns that there are no shortcuts in science, and the path to building their own craft will be long and arduous. He leans in with a predatory grin, declaring his satisfaction with the current state of affairs while the young cat looks on in horror. He makes his position clear. Until they can launch a rocket of their own design, he has no intention of letting the visitor leave this world, regardless of any pleas. In response, the pilot calmly presents a set of documents, suggesting that they should also begin considering the legal framework and regulations that will govern their new industry. He takes the papers with a grunt of surprise, his initial bravado momentarily dampened by the unexpected proposal. He stares at the documents in disbelief, a bead of sweat forming on his brow as he questions the logic of regulating a technology that doesn't even exist for them yet. The sheer audacity of planning for a future so far off seems to irritate him. As they walk away together, the pilot reflects on how the romance of space will soon captivate this world, even if the minister remains stubborn. He tells the visitor to back off, insisting they have a century of work ahead of them and shouldn't be so impatient. Across the planet Chemo, fragments of human technology had begun to scatter like seeds in the wind. In a remote mining site, a group of laborers clashed over a single cart of ore. One bear roared for the others to clear out, claiming the haul as his own, while his companion scoffed, refusing to yield what he considered his rightful fine. They were driven by a sudden, desperate greed, fueled by a government announcement that these specific minerals were essential for constructing new human-designed devices. As one worker reeled in shock at the global demand, a more cynical observer dismissed the stones as mere impurities, calling his peers fools for chasing what used to be discarded as waste. Despite such skepticism, massive extraction towers began to dominate the skyline, signaling a shift in the world's economy. The value of these materials was predicted to soar to impossible heights as the populace realized they could now profit from the very refuse they had once ignored, rebranding it as the material of the future. This fever spread quickly, intoxicating the world with the promise of human innovation. In rural villages, neighbors turned against one another, bickering over property lines and claiming ancestral lands as their own in hopes of finding hidden wealth beneath the soil. Within the halls of power, the mood was far more somber as officials gathered to debate the societal cost of this progress. Minister Ham addressed the assembly with a stern warning, arguing that the poison of foreign technology would inevitably shatter the delicate balance of their civilization, urging his colleagues to look past the initial allure and see the danger beneath. He was joined in his dissent by Director Leon, who roared his disapproval from the podium. The Lion demanded an immediate cessation of all knowledge exchanges with the human, fearing that the environmental and industrial damage would soon become irreversible, and insisted that Chemo must reclaim a future built solely by its own hands. As he retreated from the heated debate, the minister wiped sweat from his brow, the weight of history pressing down on him. He He recalled the civil unrest that had erupted when electricity and railroads were first introduced, remembering the friction between a government eager for advancement and a populace wary of change. Despite the internal conflict, the march of progress continued at the bustling train stations, where the common folk grappled with these new temptations. The question remained, if they turned their backs on this technology now, what would become of their society in the future when they might truly need it? Minister Ham leans in, his tusks bared as he bellows his defiance. He declares that the people have made their choice to embrace the human's presence, and as long as Kanashima remains on their world, they will see this through to the end. He warns the lion across from him not to even think of interfering while the process has barely begun. Because of this relentless friction, the debate has stretched on for days, punctuated by the sound of fists slamming against the podiums. Watching from the sidelines, Tonaliko feels a sense of relief seeing the minister stand his ground against the director, yet the sheer intensity of their conflict leaves her deeply unsettled. Meanwhile, the human at the center of the storm stands before a silent crowd, his mind drifting to the technology he has introduced. While the gift of engineering and rocket science has elevated his status within this society, the weight of the current political climate continues to haunt his thoughts. He later brings his concerns to Dr. Drill, proposing the creation of laws to regulate dangerous materials like explosives. The elderly physician is taken aback, sweating as he admits they have never needed such restrictions, but the human insists that these are lessons bought with the blood of his own history. This request to delve into the planet's past is born from a desire to find peace, yet his expression remains clouded. There's a palpable sense of anxiety in his voice whenever he raises the subject, as if he fears what he might uncover. In response to the request, Chairman Labra maintains a stoic front, though his decision is clear. He advises against granting the human full access, wary of what might happen if certain aspects of their history are revealed to an outsider. Seeking a reprieve from the heavy atmosphere of the capital, he finds himself lying in the soft grass beside Tonaliko's younger sister. He suggests that with such powerful support behind them, there is no need to rush. Instead, they should spend time on a journey to explore the historical and cultural heart of her world. He is absent from this quiet corner of the world, where a small library assistant struggles to reach a high shelf until a massive, gentle hand intervenes to assist him. This librarian, Gorilla Rilla, is soon interrupted in her duties at the Vanabanabani Library by a colleague who arrives with a rather unusual piece of mail. She takes the envelope as her co-worker explains that while the sender remains anonymous, the return address is quite real, making the request even more peculiar. Upon opening it, she is struck by the elegant script. The writer explains that while they have been in the city for months, the nature of their work prevents them from visiting the library in person. Despite this, they express a profound desire to learn about the history of the chemo and ask for her help in selecting the right books. As the seasons shift, the post continues to arrive at the quiet institution, marking the passage of time through a steady stream of letters. She finds herself engrossed in a new reply, where the mysterious student expresses deep gratitude for the previous volumes, noting how much they have learned. Their curiosity is far from sated, however, as they now request information regarding maritime transport for their next stage of study. A knowing smile touches her lips as she realizes that no citizen of their world with such refined penmanship would ever feel the need to hide their identity so thoroughly, hinting at her growing suspicion about the sender's true nature. She continues to facilitate this secret education, which flourishes into a deep study spanning everything from ancient transport methods to the cutting edge of modern industry, effectively documenting the entire history of their civilization through their correspondence. She gazed at the growing mountain of literature, her mind wandering to the mysterious individual on the other end of the letters. Though his motives remained a mystery, she couldn't help but feel swept up in his quest, as if they were partners on a grand treasure hunt through the annals of her civilization's history. While she pondered these secrets, the rest of the world was buzzing with the same name. In a quiet home, a group of citizens listened intently to the radio, which broadcasted the latest political maneuvering. The Alliance was already making legal claims over the visitor, while the common folk whispered about the tragedy of his lost home and the friends he must have left behind. Ignoring the global frenzy, she remained focused on her task, even as her colleagues called out that the tea was ready. With every volume she sent, she sensed his growing knowledge, yet a nagging feeling persisted that despite the vast amount of information he had consumed, the specific answer he sought still eluded him. His letters were filled with more than just requests. They contained his impressions of the world she took for granted. He wrote of the diverse creatures he encountered, the stories he read, and the beauty of the landscapes, expressing a genuine wonder that touched her deeply. Looking up from the parchment, she felt a wave of melancholy emanating from his words, a sense of profound nostalgia, or perhaps a lingering regret. It was as if he were mourning a home that was now unreachable, leading her to whisper a silent hope that his own distant star was as beautiful as the world he was now exploring. Then, a new letter arrived, its contents shifting the tone of their correspondence entirely. The ink was barely dry on a question that chilled her. He wanted to know if the library held any records of the wars that had shaped this world. She stared at the request, the weight of it settling in her chest. While the myths and legends of their past were kept on different shelves, she realized with a start that he was no longer just looking for history. He was approaching the darker, more violent truths of their existence. Since ancient times, bipedal creatures have walked the earth, their history etched into the very stone of the world. These early beings were diverse, and their physical differences often led to brutal, primitive wars. To survive, they preyed upon the four-legged, smooth-skinned beasts that shared their wilderness. They eventually sought a way out of the darkness, with the wisest among them gathering before a furry deity. In exchange for a great sacrifice, this god bestowed upon them the gift of language. This divine gift of tongues and fangs gave birth to words, effectively ending the era of constant warfare and ushering in the age of speech. The long-standing peace and the established order of their world were about to face an abrupt and total transformation. Inside the research facility, the human known as Hitoshi abruptly withdrew his cooperation. He refused to provide any further details regarding his world's culture or industry, a declaration that left the research committee, including Dr. Drill and Tonaliko, in a state of total shock. He remained stoic under her bewildered gaze, his silence a wall that no questions could penetrate. Though he offered no justification, the shift in his demeanor was palpable, leaving her with the chilling realization that something fundamental had changed within him. He remained slumped over his desk, a silent figure of exhaustion or defiance. Tonaliko, watching him, is consumed by guilt, wondering if her presence during the research was the distraction that led to this sudden halt in cooperation. She lets out a frantic, wide-mouthed scream of despair as the weight of the situation crashes down on her. This isn't just a minor setback, but a catastrophic problem for their entire society. In the sterile silence of the government corridors, the gravity of the crisis begins to spread, and the immediate priority becomes clear. The minister must be informed before the situation spirals out of control. She soon finds herself in the imposing office of the Minister of Science and Industry, where Minister Ham listens as they discuss the uncertainty of moving into the industrial phase with the limited materials Hitoshi has provided. He adjusts his glasses with a cold, calculating expression, noting that while other nations are becoming agitated, the current blueprints are sufficient to keep the parliament satisfied for the time being. However, his tone sharpens as he issues a stern warning for her to relay, making it clear that Hitoshi should not let his importance go to his head, as the human does not hold the fate of their world. After leaving his presence, she meets with Chairman Labra and expresses a desperate hope that he can shield Hitoshi from the fallout, though the chairman is far less optimistic about the other minister's patience. Ignoring the gravity of his words, she offers a determined thumbs up, but is immediately confronted by an elderly primate official. He looks at her with a weary gaze, warning that she is laboring under a dangerous misunderstanding if she truly believes the leader's actions were intended to protect the human. He stood with his back turned, his voice heavy with a chilling certainty as he remarked that he knew of no citizen who feared the human more than he did. As he began to walk away, Director Leon hurried after him, his face contorted with desperation as he pleaded for the official to listen, insisting that no one truly grasped the magnitude of the threat Hitoshi posed. His mind raced with images of the human's dark silhouette, reflecting on the unnatural physical traits of such creatures and the grim reality that their entire technological advancement had been fueled by the singular goal of slaughtering their own kind until they had utterly destroyed themselves in global conflict. He argued that while the inspection committee had initially feared a literal invasion, the truth was far more insidious. The arrival of the capsule and the subsequent sharing of information and technology were not gifts, but the sowing of the seeds of war upon their peaceful world. With sweat beading on his brow, he bared his teeth, shouting that the human was a beast seeking to make their society entirely dependent on alien technology, effectively turning their planet into a colony where the humans would rule and dictate laws for their own convenience. He continued his frantic pursuit, labeling the rocket as nothing more than bait and describing the human as a lingering pathogen from an ancient disease known as war, a sickness that their own civilization had supposedly cured and forgotten long ago. The official finally paused, glancing back with a calm, almost inscrutable expression, noting that Leon's heightened sense of danger was precisely why he had been appointed as director in the first place. He accepted the director's sudden surge of gratitude with a stoic gaze, yet quickly tempered the moment by cryptically suggesting that despite their suspicions, the absolute truth of the human's nature might remain forever out of reach. As the elder official's cryptic warnings fade into the background, the chairman stands with his back turned, contemplating the metallic vessel that brought the visitor to their world. He muses that no matter how many years they might have spent developing such technology, it would only have granted them the ability to travel through space. Yet this rocket represents something far more profound, a reflection of a cold, inevitable winter. Beside him, the press secretary listens intently, her brow furrowed as she seeks clarification on the cryptic nature of his words. He continues his explanation while focusing on the intricate details of the alien suit, suggesting that the visitor arrived from future not far from their own. He is certain that the pilot must possess a power that their kind has never before witnessed, a potential hidden within the very fabric of his being. As the image of a young human in a formal suit lingers in his mind, he wonders what else they might need to acquire while the boy still walks among them. He insists that regardless of the cost, they must extract every shred of information from the visitor before the opportunity slips through their fingers. His expression becomes one of intense, almost desperate longing as he poses a radical question. Should they strive to obtain the very essence of a human, so that they might finally become humanity themselves? Below, the director can only watch in silent horror, sweat beading on his face as he realizes the depth of the chairman's obsession. Elsewhere, the press secretary and the elderly doctor are interrupted by a frantic official who bursts into the room. He gasps out a warning, shouting that there is grave trouble involving Hitoshi. She watches in stunned silence as the realization hits her. The boy has already been taken. In the distance, a group of special police officers surrounds the human, escorting him away toward an uncertain fate. The human pilot is abruptly seized by the secret police, a move that leaves his companions frozen in disbelief as they watch him being led away. He is marched through the corridors by a squad of armed enforcers, mercenaries under Director Leon's direct command who are tasked with handling extrajudicial punishments during perceived emergencies. She struggles to understand the legal basis for such an arrest, but the official narrative has already been established. His actions are being framed as inherently hostile toward the chemo people. The doctor observes that while the government hasn't formally recognized these charges, the arrest is a calculated ploy to force the pilot to reveal his true nature, painting him as a saboteur who intended to exploit and dismantle their society by withholding vital information. She remains baffled by the situation, unable to comprehend why the director would resort to such extreme and seemingly irrational measures against their guests. The chairman and the doctor discuss the grim reality of the situation, suspecting that a bottomless greed, or perhaps something even more terrifying, has taken hold of Leon's ambitions, driving him to this desperate act. A heavy security door slides shut with a sharp, metallic clang, echoing through the cold, sterile hallway. He sits alone in the center of the windowless cell, a solitary figure awaiting the start of a trial that will determine the fate of a human in this world. He sat in the heavy silence of his confinement until the sudden, urgent call of his name echoed through the bars. Tonaliko and Dr. Drill had arrived, their faces etched with concern as they peered into the sterile room where he was being held. Because he had shown no resistance and possessed no natural claws or fangs, the guard maintained only a minimal presence, even allowing him writing materials to bridge the communication gap. The visitors stood before him, the weight of the situation hanging thick in the air of the small cell. Looking at him now, Tonaliko was struck by how utterly exhausted he appeared, a stark contrast to his demeanor during his previous arrest. She quickly scribbled a note expressing her deep regret for his current predicament, but he could only look up and wonder why she felt the need to apologize for things beyond her control. While she offered her silent sympathies, Dr. Drill moved directly to the urgent matters at hand, explaining that time was short. He revealed that the faction seeking his removal had joined forces with Director Leon, who was already rallying the public against him in a full-scale political assault. The doctor continued, detailing how they were exploiting the chaos of recent events to spread propaganda, painting the human as a dangerous threat to the chemo people. By shifting all the blame onto him, they hoped to justify their actions and solidify their power in the eyes of the public. In response to these harsh truths, he looked down at the paper and wrote a somber admission. They were right, and he should never have come to this planet. Dr. Drill watched him, the gravity of the human's self-reflection mirroring the grim reality of their circumstances. He then held up another note, stating with finality that what was done could not be undone, a resignation that Tonaliko found impossible to accept. Her eyes widened in shock, her voice trembling as she refused to believe he was giving up so easily. The elderly doctor could not deny the truth of the situation, admitting that the human's arrival had indeed brought a myriad of problems. He warned that the number of enemies would only continue to grow, leaving them all in a precarious position as the trial loomed. He looks out at the vastness of space, reflecting on how the arrival of the human has fundamentally changed their world. Once a closed and isolated sphere, their reach has now extended far into the cosmos, driven by the sudden expansion of their horizons. This shift is evident in every facet of their society. They have deciphered the human's language, studied his maps, and even witnessed the launch of rockets that once seemed like impossible dreams. The knowledge brought by this visitor has acted as a catalyst for unprecedented progress. Looking back at the stars, the empty vacuum that was once considered a mere void has taken on an indescribable significance, representing a future that is no longer out of reach. Turning back to the young man, The elderly doctor speaks with a gentle gravity, insisting that he would never consider the human's arrival a mistake. He asked for patience, requesting that Hitoshi withhold judgment on the circumstances of their meeting until the full picture is revealed. Stepping forward to offer her support, the press secretary agrees wholeheartedly, reminding Hitoshi that while the road ahead is long, they are not alone. She vows that they will stand bravely against Director Leon, fighting within the strict confines of the law to ensure justice is served. Elsewhere, the director himself seethes with a predatory intensity, his face contorted in a snarl as he is flanked by his security detail. He is far from defeated, promising to utterly dismantle the human's defense and crush him during the upcoming trial. Unaware of the director's malice, she looks directly into Hitoshi's eyes, her expression one of unwavering determination. She pleads with him to trust in their efforts, explaining that every action they have taken thus far has been a deliberate step leading toward this pivotal moment. With a sudden burst of energy, she pumps her fist, urging him to give everything he has during today's hearing. The human can only watch in mild surprise as her infectious resolve fills the room, marking the beginning of their legal battle. She had emphasized that the proceedings would begin immediately, a pace that feels jarring to Hitoshi. As he adjusts his collar, he reflects on how rarely humans on Earth are subjected to such a direct and rapid transition to a formal hearing, realizing that the time for preparation has already passed. He is interrupted by the elder primate official, who leans in with a steadying presence. The official encourages him to simply relax and recount his genuine feelings and experiences since the day he arrived on their planet, emphasizing that simple honesty will be his most powerful tool in the coming trial. The official's final word is a gentle reminder not to strain himself under the immense pressure. Above, the cold, sterile lights of the chamber watch over the silence, marking the final moments of calm before the storm of litigation begins. The grand hall stands empty and expectant, a silent arena for the coming conflict. The air is thick with gravity as the fierce legal battle, governed by the strict letter of the law, is finally poised to unfold.